Mandy, thanks very much for coming on. Your book, this sounds pretty funny. Y'all fired. A Southern Belle's Guide to Restoring Federalism and Draining the Swamp. And I loved the sound of it. From a State Department arranged German sex hotel to costly unsubstantiated investigations brought on by anonymous sources, Y'all Fired shows readers the unfortunate reality of a young woman's fight to institute America First reforms and what the permanent government of D.C. will do to resist it. Buckle up, because it gets personal. How does it get personal for you at the EPA?
Yeah, it's a great question. It really is the anecdotal experiences that I had of how far the deep state was willing to go, not just to stop the president's policy agenda which is unconstitutional, mind you, but also how far they were willing to go to demean, demoralize, and discredit political appointees like myself from getting his policies across the finish line. And so, I talk a lot about growing up. I grew up in a very rural area. I was a military brat, moved around a lot, but ended up in a very rural area where people, they really hold high the credibility of what the US Constitution is and the institutions that are supposed to represent it. And so going into EPA and experiencing what I did, and the way that the deep state operates just because they disagree politically, it was hard to deal with. But writing this book was, I thought it was important, but also somewhat cathartic to kind of work through those issues and then do what I do best, which is try to come up with a plan of action for how do we fix this, not just giving up, but
Yeah.
how do we get to the point where, the US voter is once again the most important person instead of the unelected bureaucrat.
I guess next to the DOJ, EPA has the most power. It wields the most power over a person's individual liberty. Did you find that to be daunting?
Yeah, well, the EPA is the tip of the spear for the left Democrat Party agenda. And we saw this time and again. Things ramped up during the Obama administration, during his pin and phone initiative,
Yes.
where he said he'd had enough with having to go through Congress to pass policies that were going to have a big impact. He was just going to do it anyway. And they looked to the EPA because of longstanding ambiguities and Chevron deference. Just to jump into some Supreme Court cases,
Yes, we
that
will.
that
Absolutely.
no longer rules the day because of our originalist Supreme Court. But for so long, EPA in particular was able to get away with implementing regulations that were not supported by the law or otherwise justified because of this deference rule that basically deferred to them and depended on their expertise. So EPA, you're exactly right. After DOJ, in terms of the problem children for conservative administrations that want to see a balanced approach to governance, EPA was really ground zero in a lot of ways.
I would wholly recommend. I mean, I'm on the West Coast, and you see it at play every single day with what you can and cannot do on your property, whether or not they feel emboldened, the local and county, state officials feel emboldened to just take over your well. I mean, it's scary out there. Honestly, I can't use wood in my fireplace. Pretty soon, they've outlawed natural wood or something. Just all manner of things. Oil, or rather natural gas stoves. I mean, this is just absurd. And I want to get one before
Yeah.
they outlaw that. And so here we are. It gets you right where you live. Here you are. You come in with the Trump administration. Trump won 45. And you've got the worst of the worst coming at you. You've got the DOJ and or their people acting supposedly in their role, and then you've got EPA, and you've got the worst of the left coming at you. What happened? What did they do to you?
Yeah, so I was a big part of President Trump getting out of the Paris Climate Accord. Before going into the administration, thank you, thank you. Before going into the administration, I'd worked in the U.S. Senate. I had the opportunity to work for former Chairman Senator Jim Inhofe, who
Awesome
was an
guy.
advisor to the president throughout and leading up to his election, the first term. And so the Paris Climate Accord, President Trump He said it on the campaign trail. It was bad for U.S. workers. We were going to get out, but you wouldn't believe the fights that we had. Really, from when I officially started, which was in March, to when he made the announcement, which was in June at the Rose Garden, that we were getting out, back and forth, back and forth. As you
Mm.
can imagine, there are a lot of people at the State Department that did not like my stinking guts. And they went out of their way to make that very, very clear. And one of the ways that they got back at me, again, it was totally bizarre to me. But when I went to go later that year to negotiate a better deal, as the president had delegated and told some of us to do,
Right.
the State Department, when you travel as a federal employee, they handle all your logistics, where you stay, where you go. I didn't think twice about it because I had traveled before as a staffer in the United States Senate. Well, when I get to Germany, I realize, first of all, where we're going is about 45 minutes away from where the actual negotiations were going to occur, which was kind of a red flag. It wasn't quite red yet, but it was curious to me. And then when I got into the hotel and started looking around, I realized this is not a place that anyone should be. It was a sex hotel that they put me up in the middle of rural Germany, and it was a way to harass and send that message that again, they weren't just going to try to thwart the policy efforts, they were going to try and make my life as difficult as they possibly could.
That was in the EPA travel office, or however that happened.
Well, it's coordinated through the State Department. So it's the embassy that's there in Frankfurt, Germany. So they would have had to coordinate with the EPA folks, would coordinate with the DC based State Department, DC based State Department with the folks in Frankfurt. And so those are the people that put me in that sex hotel.
So you don't want to come off as being a whiny little bee, right? You don't want to
Right.
sound wah, wah, wah. So what did you do?
Well, it's interesting you say that because when I immediately texted my chief of staff at the time, and when I first said those words, I was like, I think I'm in a sex hotel. He thought it was funny, and then he
Yeah.
was like, Wait, you're serious? And I was like, Yeah, I'm pretty sure I had just seen two ladies who had just finished one job and were carted off to the next one, and he was like, Oh my gosh, we were. Essentially the blood drained from his face kind of moment. And so I went back and I reported back to the State Department folks, and you could just tell that they were kind of snickering under their breath. They thought I was just being kind of high maintenance, and I was like, I promise I'm not being high maintenance. I would stay in a hostel, I would stay anywhere, but I don't want to spend the night at the sex hotel. Well, unfortunately, according to them, all the hotels and all the land were full, and so we had to spend one
Oh.
night in the sex hotel. And I say we because it was me and one other young woman. Of the 120 plus people in the delegation, only two of us, both young women working at the EPA, political appointees for President Trump, ended up at this sex hotel. So we spent there one night, and then the next day I broke protocol and I booked my own room. I said, this is ridiculous. And I found another place, stayed in it, and I ended up cutting the trip short, just because it was really difficult to be there, and I knew that there wasn't anything serious and worth our time, energy, and resources to invest.
So what'd they say?
So, and well, then when we get back, I went to my chief of staff. We had put together an entire documented experience, went to the State Department. It was under Rex Tillerson at the time,
Oh God.
and nothing ever happened. Nothing ever came of it. And so that was one of those moments where it was just like in any professional setting, someone would have lost their job or at least been reprimanded.
Sure.
But only in the federal government. Not only did nothing happen, the bureaucrats who were behind this form of harassment and outright bullying, frankly, just because of who I was there working on behalf of and represented and what we represented. 2 weeks later, we had another meeting and they were all there and just had to kind of like pick up and move on like nothing had happened.
So, I mean, I would have stayed. I mean, I would have stayed and just gone and just run roughshod over them if I been able to, just because you don't want to give them the satisfaction of having to leave town. But this is beyond hazing. This is just, it's like when it's worse than the Clintons and all of their staffers taking the W's off all the keyboards, okay, for George W. Bush. I mean, it's just it's beyond that. It's harassment. And it's disgusting too. And by the way, had this been the woke time we've just previously come through, somebody would have been fired, actually, in all likelihood. But you're a tough chick. Well, okay, so this is what they. I'm sorry, sex hotel. It's just so bad. It's so
It's
bad, but
crazy. It's
it's.
it's like you wouldn't think about it.
I
It's the craziest thing.
I mean, you get an A for creativity. Okay, it's wrong. That's one of those things you say the guy next to you. Oh man, maybe I should put her in that one that all the GIs show up at. Blah blah blah. I mean, but you still got the last laugh because the Trump administration pulled out of the Paris Accords.
Yeah,
So
pulled out
screw
of the Paris
them.
Accords, and also are exposing what that part of the Nations and the whole climate back and forth actually represent, which is the last administration was willing to sell out the U.S. economy and U.S. jobs in Ohio and Pennsylvania and ship them overseas to places like China. It was a total racket, and thankfully we have President Trump now who realizes, one, it's a bad deal on its face, and number two, he's not going to go along with the crazy ideas from the United Nations that, quite frankly, are designed to undermine our successful economy and try and replace it with the socialist styled economies that they're all
Yeah.
having to operate in.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, our way or the highway for all of those environmental people who take their own private jets to go tell us not to ride on planes or have wood for our fireplace. And it's ironic. It's actually it's an environy of huge proportions. So, okay. So you mentioned the State Department, just sort of going 30,000 feet. You mentioned the State Department. And one of the interviews I watched of you, you talked about how the EPA is as big a sink for money laundering as USAID. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, and this came out recently, and thank goodness for the good work of the Department of Government Efficiency, as well as
Yeah.
conservative media that's been willing to dig in. This really got on everyone's radar. There was a Project Veritas video that came out right before the change from the Biden administration to the Trump administration, where a gentleman who was a political appointee for the Biden administration, working at EPA over their I'm air quoting grants office, he said that because Trump was coming in, they were trying to shovel out all this taxpayer money, and it was akin to throwing gold bars off the Titanic. Well, when Administrator Zeldin and his team got in there, so they started digging through the books and found that there was an off campus slush fund to the tune of $20 billion set up. And all of this money was designed to be out of basic oversight reach of the federal government. Shenanigans already occur when they're under the umbrella of federal oversight. This was explicitly designed to thwart even some of those basic checks. And so $20 billion, dollars, just to put this in perspective, this is about twice the amount of EPA's annual operating budget. And it was $20 billion put in an off-campus bank account, and it was being sent not to environmental groups, but to groups that were politically aligned with the last administration. One of
Yes.
them, one recipient that got $2 billion, it's just crazy billion,
Jeez.
was Stacey Abrams was involved, and it was supposed to be about replacing old stoves with new modern stoves because she has such an extensive expertise in this area. And
Yeah,
just
of
come to
course. I've
find
always
out,
heard her. I've heard her talk about that in her sex novels.
I know, yeah, like she's the go-to authority on all
She
of
really
those
writes sex
issues.
novels. Sorry, I'm just for those shocked people. She writes romance novels. Okay. Okay. Go ahead. Sorry.
Interesting. Okay. Well, that's good to know on the theme of sex. But EPA, they had this office. It was called the Environmental Justice Office. And, the reason they called it the Environmental Justice Office, because if you or I or anyone asked questions about, well, what does this office actually do? Or if we cast any kind of criticism, they could say, well, you don't care about low income minority groups, or you're racist, or you're
Yeah.
bigoted, or whatever the isms that they throw your way if you're asking legitimate questions. And what it actually was a giant taxpayer money laundering scheme whereby they were shoveling taxpayer dollars out the door to groups that were more politically aligned and focused than having anything to do with protecting public health and the environment.
You talk about environmental justice, and what really troubles me as someone from the Pacific Northwest is seeing all of these new crops of environmental justice lawyers coming through the ranks, taught by, I'm sure, the finest Marxists money can buy at each university and law school. They've stood up an entire, ecosystem around these kinds of programs, and receive like little baby birds all the money from the EPA and those programs. What do you say about all these environmental justice lawyers? Is that where they all go to live their fondest dreams, the EPA?
Yeah, a lot of them do. And this is something that the administration, we started working on it the first go round. Again, this administration, the second go round, they came in guns blazing and they've already done so much. But there have been these feeder programs from some of these largely liberal colleges that receive this type of funding where when you apply for a federal job, you basically get like extra marks or extra credit if you're affiliated with one of these programs that has a streamlined relationship with hiring at EPA. So you end up at EPA, especially with a lot of the younger ranks, they're more activist prone than they are the engineers or the technicians or the economists that the agency actually needs to responsibly do its job consistent with the law.
Yeah. And then you've got, so they're in court, phalanxes of these justice lawyers are out there, and those are the people that you wonder about every time there's a program that the EPA suggests. That even if they're not within the system, they're outside the system working for an NGO, getting apparently $2 billion and other kinds of monies and that sort of thing to fight other people who want to. They're racist and they're terrible and they love dirty water and really really polluted air, and so they come after you saying that. I know that in our, we don't have a lot more time. We have like halfway to go, but I just calling an audible there. What did Lee Zeldin, who's the EPA administrator, do with the findings that he's just recently done? He's gotten rid of 31 items of. This is post Loper Bright, post which is the Chevron doctrine case. Talk a little bit about what he has done. And I also want to know why you're not there with him fighting in the trenches.
Well, I'll answer the last thing first. You can't see right now, but I'm having a baby next week. So
Oh,
one
congratulations.
of the reasons I'm not
Oh,
there, I've been really focused on being a present mama with my children here in Oxford, Mississippi, and I've found ways to be helpful from afar, which is what I promised to a lot of my colleagues who did commit to go back in. So there's that. But with regards to Administrator Lee Zeldin, I mean he's done so much. So two things that you mentioned, his day of deregulation. This was back, I think it was towards the end of March this year. He announced 31 key actions that were aimed with achieving the five pillars he laid out early on, which it's everything from permitting reform to making sure the air is clean, the water is clean, legacy of pollution from an industrial past where we weren't as keen on or aware of impacts to the environment, addressing all of those issues, also supporting President Trump's vision of making us the AI capital of the world, as well as getting rid of the EV mandate. So in March, he announced 31 major deregulatory actions. This is things along the lines of the Clean Power Plan 2.0 or 3.0, depending on how you count. But this was the first Obama and then Biden administration's attempts to shift generation away from coal, oil, and natural gas, which provides 80% of our daily energy needs, and more towards their politically preferred but second rate technologies like wind and solar, as well as some green hydrogen that is really early on in its
mm,
infancy and extremely expensive. And so they were trying to force the grid onto energy sources they preferred to the detriment of reliability and affordability. It also included things really uh, technical regulatory fixes, dealing with hazardous air pollutants, you name it. But Administrator Zeldin did that in March. And then most recently, 2 weeks ago, he announced a proposed rescission, so getting rid of something called the endangerment finding. The
yes.
endangerment finding is the legal document that activated the entirety of the greenhouse gas regulations at EPA. So everything from the EV mandate to the Clean Power Plan, like I mentioned, across the board, trying to control everything with regards to what became the Green New scam. And so Administrator Zeldin proposed to get rid of this document. The left will tell you that that document is, the representative of some comprehensive scientific review. That's not the case. It was the result of a manipulated political process. And Administrator Zeldin had his team go through, in conjunction with the Department of Energy and these really phenomenal scientists, to take a look at the science and the technical application of these greenhouse gas regulations, their policy impacts, and he's proposed to get rid of it. It's so big. This will save $1 trillion in regulatory costs. So that's $1 trillion
Wow.
that people are investing in their ideas and businesses, and the latest and greatest technologies being instituted in their various operations, instead of sending that to Washington, D.C., and just growing an over bloated, unchecked bureaucracy.
What do you think the long-term effects of this uh, change in the endangerment finding would mean for consumers, the people who actually have to pay the bills on all these people with their private jets?
Yeah, well, big picture, this really is going to jumpstart the reindustrialization of America, which President Trump has made a really important part of his vision, bringing back jobs into the U.S., onshoring the advanced manufacturing industries that we want to build out here in the United States because of, yes, the jobs to the people they directly hire, but also the indirect benefits that you have in a thriving economic ecosystem. The other piece of it for consumers, when it comes to the electricity grid, we're going to have more reliable, lower cost electricity. It's going to take a little bit of time to get there because these decisions really manifest themselves, the consequences of these decisions or the benefits manifest themselves in 10 to 20-year increments, but nonetheless, we're on a much better path where grids aren't going to crash. People aren't going to have to deal with brownouts or, being told on a 100-degree day to turn their thermostat up to 80 so that the whole system doesn't crash.
Right.
We have the technology and the wherewithal to not have to do that. You've just had policy decisions in the last administration that have prevented the technicians from being able to build out solid grids that can handle that type of demand.
You mean we could have been buttressing our grid this whole time and they didn't do expletive deleted about it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And not only that, Victoria, some of
Oh
these areas
man.
like
Oh man,
California.
that leaves. I'm sorry, but talk about the vulnerability about that before that. I mean, before you go to what you were going to say, talk about the national security vulnerability of allowing that to happen.
Yeah, well, when you degrade the energy system, that degrades a bedrock piece of national security. The reality is that a modern, reliable energy grid, it's necessary for modern society to work. That includes everything from us being able to safely and affordably be able to drive from point A to point B, or safely and affordably be able to turn on the lights in your home, to our defense operations being able to operate safely and reliably, and having the logistical support on the fuel side and the technology side. It all plays into one another, which is why early on in the administration, President Trump declared a national state of energy emergency, and it had to do with everything from a failing grid in a lot of ways, and then
Yeah.
also the fact that the Strategic Petroleum Reserve had been siphoned off to some of the lowest levels since the early 1980s. And that reserve is there, yes, for emergency purposes, but also for national security. And so all of it plays into one another, and it's the policy decisions, not because we don't have the technology to have the strongest, most robust energy grid or the strongest, fullest strategic petroleum reserve. It's because of policy decisions and this shift away from focusing on what works from a technology perspective to this kind of blue sky approach we saw from the left, where they really were giving pitches that their donors and capital investors, technology, trying to push technologies they were invested in, to the detriment of those fundamental bedrock services the federal government is supposed to be providing, which is national security as well as affordable, reliable energy access for all.
Under Lee Zeldin and the Trump administration currently, can we finally get around away rather from the talk about CO2 being a precursor to global warming, climate catastrophe, fill in the blank, to whatever date setting weirdos are putting that out there?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a part of what he announced just a few weeks ago, this proposed rescission of the endangerment finding. And you have to think about what they actually did. The focus has always been on carbon dioxide. And the reason is carbon dioxide is everywhere. It's literally plant food. And
Oh
we all
no,
learned this.
there's carbon dioxide. I just
I know.
breathed.
We
Anyway.
exhale it, they inhale it, and vice versa, right? It's this perfect cycle, this balanced aspect of the broader ecosystems. And nonetheless, Lee Zeldin had his team look at both the climate science and the technical implications of CO2. And all of that being said, yes, we will get away from the left being able to use carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases mixed together as their fear mongering tactics to try and scare the American people into accepting their left wing policies. And so, the end is near in terms of having to deal with that. And the good news is, EPA can focus on what it's actually supposed to do, cleaning up the air, water, legacy pollution, all
Mhm.
the good work that Administrator Zeldin's done, and President Trump and his vision for reindustrializing the Rust Belt and bringing jobs back to Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio, rural places like Mississippi, where I live. That can really take off because they're reducing unnecessary cost and liability that businesses do not want to have to deal with when they're looking at major investments here in this country.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We have to, I mean, being in charge of AI is very important. We don't want the Chinese in charge of AI. Sure, they'll have their own version, they already do, but we need to set the template for that which is approved usage for AI and the boundaries. Is the grant making process at EPA changing?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of the issues early on. Administrator Zeldin, he put a political in charge of the grant, or maybe not directly in charge, but with direct oversight of the grant making process at EPA. Now, if you read
Mhm.
any of the articles about that decision, they throw up the flag of political interference. But the reality is we needed basic oversight because of the bad actions that they had done. The fact that they were a part of this taxpayer money laundering scheme to push $20 billion out of the reach of the next administration, they absolutely needed oversight. They needed to
Sure.
be reined in. And I'll tell you this with regards to that office, I mean, that was one of the early decisions that Administrator Zeldin took, which was to shut down that office because it doesn't do anything to tangibly contribute to the legally mandated mission of the agency.
Hmm.
We know what it was. It was coined as some do-gooder institution, but it really was just this money laundering, monstrosity that wasted taxpayer dollars, which is totally unacceptable in this administration.
Yeah, well, we've seen all the money that's been wasted in the name of global warming, climate catastrophe, et cetera, down the line. In fact, wasn't it Inhofe's office that used to keep track of all the weirdo expenditures that, I mean, we have, that was the shrimp on a treadmill. Remember that one? Yeah, you probably not, but that happened to be in Oregon, as a matter of fact. And, hey, we put global warming in our grant application. So therefore we got this $100,000 to put shrimp on some sort of treadmill in the water and see how he works. And it's just like, no, really, that's even dumber than Stacey Abrams getting money to replace everybody's stoves. She did send out a press release, and my guess is that she's skirting that money, skirting away, and using that money for something else. Are we ever going to be able to claw all that back? I know he's trying.
Yeah, he is. He's in the process of clawing that money back. In addition to, he made a recent announcement about a lot of solar grants that had been not granted, but promised, if you will. And after they stopped any money from going out the door when they first got in, they paused it. They wanted to do a review to see if any of it was actually justified in going towards tangible investments in line with the agency's actual mission, not political goals of the
Hmm.
last administration, and sought to claw back some of these funds, including the $20 billion. They're still in the process of doing that, but very much committed. It's going to take time because it's all caught up in court, but
Sure.
nonetheless, he's on the side of right, especially when it comes to the law.
Then, I mean, that was criminal.
Yeah,
Putting that money in that account in New York was criminal. Yes?
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. And it was designed to again subvert basic federal oversight requirements. And so, what I hope is that the money's not only brought back, but the people who are behind this and who pushed it, that justice is brought to bear on them as well.
Oh, amen. So, what next for you, babies? Congratulations,
Thank you.
and that's fantastic. And how do you stay in the fight? I know you're saying you do, and a little bit from your base at Ole Miss.
Yeah, certainly. Well, it's really just helping friends that are currently in the administration work through certain issues. Sometimes that's just being a shoulder to rhetorically cry on. I haven't seen any actual real tears yet, but that,
You
and then
will.
also a lot of work in preparatory work that was done prior to President Trump walking in on day one. I worked on Project 2025. We weren't the only conservative group that was coming up with a plan of action for the next conservative administration, but
Hmm.
that's the project I was involved in. And there's a whole chapter on EPA about not only what policy goals would make sense, but how they could ultimately be achieved. So pulling from those resources, also connecting folks, a big part of being successful in a administration as a political appointee is knowing your fellow political appointees. And so just being a part of helping folks connect the dots with the right people and supporting them in whatever they ultimately need, whether it's through the media or whether it's just through explaining XYZ policies and how we thought about it the first go round. I can do all that from here in
Sure.
Oxford, Mississippi.
Yeah. 2025 is, I mean, you may, have they tried to throw you in jail for that yet? I mean, it
Yeah.
has been the most maligned piece of campaign information I've ever seen. I mean, it's just worse than the media treated it worse than Hillary Clinton trying to put Donald Trump in jail for being a Russian spy.
That's exactly right. They treated it like it was worse than the dossier. That's a really good point of comparison there. But yeah, it's interesting because it's this policy mandate the Heritage Foundation has literally been putting out
For
since
years.
the 1980s, and this was the latest version. I think they were just so upset was because it was so good. It was written by a lot of us who had worked in the first administration, and it's not only a plan of action, but it's a codification of institutional wisdom of what it was like to work in these places, something that during the first Trump administration we were lacking. A lot of us really were. And so I think the left attacked it so much because it is
It was
it
good.
is a powerful document.
Yeah, 900 pages is pretty good. And, there they go again. I mean, I'm sure Mark Elias was in charge of that. And he and David Brock putting out their usual, whatever campaign it is, the 2016. Of course, they were pissed because in 2017, they came up with that big blueprint to send everybody to jail. Did they try to put you in jail? Last question.
Oh yeah, they did. I had two FBI agents and someone from EPA's IG office show up to my office at EPA with a criminal subpoena. And anyway, there was no there, but I still had to spend tens of thousands of dollars on attorneys pushing back. And that's again one of these tools the left has used is they've corrupted key institutions to go after people and ideas that they do not like. And I'm not
Correct.
alone. There's a number of political appointees that experienced this. And, if you don't comply, then they can throw you in jail.
Sure. Yeah. If you didn't go along with those FBI agents, they could have put you in for contempt, or they could have caught you up in a perjury trap, which I'm sure they tried to do.
Yep.
How'd you get out of that?
Well, funny enough, actually, FOIA, Freedom of Information Act requests, when I went into the agency, a lot of nonprofit environmental groups FOIA'd all of my emails. One of them, the Environmental Defense Fund, no friend of mine,
No
but they
kidding.
had put all of those documents in a file and I was able to access them. They were still online and it had all of my interactions with the ethics official. And I just sent that to the folks at the DOJ and said, you have access to the unredacted versions, but here's the redacted versions that clearly show I was complying explicitly with the advice of the career ethics official in terms of filling out XYZ paperwork.
Those bastards.
Yeah, but that's not the point. They just wanted to. It was interesting. They came knocking on my door 2 weeks after Politico, a DC media entity had run a story about me potentially being picked to run EPA or be in a leadership position. So all they really wanted to do was, in the event I was nominated for a position, for senators on the other side of the aisle to be able to say, well, she's under investigation. And this is what they try to do. They try to discredit people in all sorts of ways to stop the president from being successful in implementing his agenda and getting his people in places of consequence to help achieve that outcome.
Yeah, well, you're going to have to read about it all in Y'all Fired, A Southern Belle's Guide to Restoring Federalism and Draining the Swamp. Get that book. Mandy Gunasekara, thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on, and best of luck and blessings to you and your family as you grow. God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Victoria.
Thank you.